And I'm going to give you a quick rundown, a synopsis basically, of what all the things that you can look for and in the order that you should be looking for them. And then I'll explain how you can use a simpler version. Okay. So these are the 9 considerations, and this has served me to get the best picture. This is my basic framework, okay? And the reason is that this information becomes available to you sequentially, just like this, right? So one play ends, and immediately at the end of that play, you know already the field position and the hash, right? So that's your first piece of information you can glean. Why is that important? Well, field position, we got this football field. It's a pretty good football field. I don't know if the dimensions are right. It's certainly not to scale. All right. But from the 0 to the 20, from the 20 to the 40, from the 40 to the 40, from the 40 to the 20, and then the 20 in. I'll make that shorter. Okay? Those are the zones that we're going to look at. The reason for that is, and these all have different names, and I don't care what you call them, but one for sure is the red zone, right? Well, teams run different plays in the red zone than they do, say, midfield, right? And they certainly run different plays backed up near their own goal line than they would run, say, at our goal line. For example, if you are backed up on offense, then you want a hard count, because the penalty for your mess up, it pales in comparison to the penalty for the defense's mess up. Because if you're at the 2-yard line and you accidentally false start, you move back 1 yard. But if you get them to jump, they move forward 5 yards, and the difference between being on the 2-yard line and the 5-yard line is total. It's like, it's worlds different, right? So that's much different than if they were knocking on our goal line door, right? Well, now that would be stupid to go on a hard count, because now the penalties reverse their relative importance, right? So that's one way to use field position, for example, to start to tip you off, right? Down distance is the next thing that's apparent. It's pretty much at the same time as the field position and hash. You'll know the down and distance. Same thing. Tendencies from down and distance are pretty big, especially third down tendencies, right? Third and very short, third and long. A lot of teams love to screen on third and long. On third and short, some teams will run quick passes. Some teams will run powerful runs or quarterback sneaks. And some teams, for example, on second and short, you mentioned this the other day, a second and short is sort of a throwaway down. You can take a shot on second and short because you've got third down to play again. So a lot of teams have the tendency of going very deep on second and very short. So these are the kinds of things that you might get from that. So if we have, I'm just going to start a scenario here. They're at the positive 20, okay? So they're on our 20-yard line, 20 yards away from scoring, right? So I'm going to put positive 20, okay? That gives me a bank of plays that I know they can choose from. Okay, let's say the bank is that big. From the plus 20, this is the group of plays that they have shown that they might run. Yeah. Right? Now, it's probably a pretty big chunk of the whole thing, right? So we're going to keep narrowing down. So down distance is the next thing, right? So after we've got field position here, then we go down in distance here. Okay, so let's say it's around 20 and it's third and, let's go third and 3, okay? So on third and 3 from the 20, chances are they're going to run the ball. Why? Because they're in field goal range. They don't want to get knocked out of field goal range. They don't want to lose the ball and give up the almost sure points, right? So we'll probably find out that they have a tendency on third and short, especially in the red zone, to run the ball and be very safe. So we can use that information. So this bank of plays, after we've considered down and distance, now it's a little smaller than this one, right? Okay, so then after that, we go to offensive personnel grouping, OPG, okay? Now, a lot of times in a game, players won't be aware of this. They should, but they won't be, because usually there's a spotter on the sideline looking to the other sideline, watching people come in and off the field so that they know what the personnel group is, right? If it's 11 personnel, meaning 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers, and you see a running back run onto the field and a tight end run off, then we know we're in 20 personnel now. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, it might mean for this team that if they're in 20 personnel, they're running some kind of a triple option because they have 2 really good running backs that they want both in the game, and so they're running all kinds of crisscross tricky stuff. You know, one guy's the dive one time, the other guy's the pitch, and vice versa. So Independence used to do that with TJ actually, and yeah. So you'll see some of that, right? Offensive personnel grouping, that will narrow it down a little bit more. So now this bank of possible plays has gotten even smaller, okay? And then we're going to narrow it down a little more with formation. All right, so let's say we got OPG 20 here. Okay, so we got 2 running backs, and that gave us that bank of plays. Then we get a formation. Let's say the formation is, well, I guess I would call it, depends on what you call it. I would call it 21. And the reason I would call it 21 is because there are going to be 2 receivers, X, F, oh no, wait, sorry, Z, F, X, and then back here in the backfield you have the quarterback and 1 running back and another running back there. Okay, so these guys are wide. I would call that 21, and then I would call the backfield set. So that's the next narrowing filter that we'll use. The backfield set for this. Well, maybe it is that every time they're in this personnel grouping and they line up in split backs, they pass. Maybe it's that every time they line up in this personnel grouping in I backs, it's a run. You see? So the formation is one thing. The backfield set's different. Right? Yeah. That's a more specific. So now we got backfield set.
Yeah. And right? Before are you walking through your, I guess, backers or the whole defense on like this whole process? Are you giving them?
This is actually how we watch film together, right?
Yeah.
So whenever I teach anybody to watch film, we go in this order. Okay. Now field position hash, maybe not always that, but certainly down distance, offensive personnel grouping, just like this in that order. And the reason,
I was gonna say, so do you think? Because there was always even when I was in college, it was the offensive meeting. We'd be done at 8 o'clock. Defensive meeting, I go peek in, like they're still in the middle of film, and then I get a text from one of the corners, hey, we got out, and it's like 9:45, 10 o'clock. Do you feel like this is a typical, D coordinator's process? Or is it that in depth?
So here's
because you're the one that's reacting off of what's going on.
Yes, I think defensive meetings are always longer, not always, but typically longer because there's just more to consider, right? Like we have to consider all of the things that are happening because the ball could go anywhere. You just have to consider where you want to go with the ball, in a sense, right? Like in other words, hey, we're going over here in this play. You might not even pay attention to what the backside's doing.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, offenses are cocky and kind of weak and soft and all that. So I just defensive. I mean, right. No. How were your offensive meetings in college?
What do you mean? Like
you got out later or the same time as defenders?
O-line meetings, we were in there.
I was just gonna say O-line's in there a long time.
We were in there for quite a while.
Yeah, you got more to consider.
Yeah. Well,
because there's all these stunts and blitzes and all that,
Yeah. I mean, I'd always be.
Yeah. And
I'd have 5 minutes to go put all my pads and knee pads and all the shit on, and then we'd be like the last ones out to practice. Like.
Yeah, and I think a part of it too is, for me, I have a little, I guess, distorted view because backtrack. When I was in college, it was 2013, 2017. So like it was the tempo, all that spread era. So like we were in the mindset of it doesn't matter what plays you call or what defense they're in.
Just look for the matchup, right?
Look for the matchup. Execute what we run. Yeah. What we're best at. Let's just run that. Obviously you have tweaks and stuff, but don't make it rocket science.
Right.
Tempo, play fast. Someone's gonna get out of position at some point.
Yep.
They kind of stick to the what we're good at.
And
have a few tendency breakers.
That's a pretty. I mean, I think that's a very common philosophy, right? Yeah. Like let's do what we do and do it well.
Yeah.
Peyton Manning, right? Peyton Manning with the Colts had 5 offensive plays. It was the hardest thing to stop because they executed it perfectly.
Yeah.
It was like, remember that stretch play that they had? It was like a stretch play action. So he would be under center, ball snap. He would sprint straight down behind the line of scrimmage. He would sprint for, 10, 12 yards on a really wide zone path, right? And Joseph Adai or Edgerrin James, whoever it was, would run this really wide zone path because they wanted to take as long as possible with the play fake so that when he pulled back like this, the second level was open, right? The linebackers didn't know what to do because they're pressing the line of scrimmage. If he hands the ball off, we got to stop it, right? And then all of a sudden, the receiver who's had 3 seconds to run his route already is wide open, and now I just realized it's pass and I got to get back there, right? So for that type of game, it was rocket science. You know what I mean? For that, I was watching film trying to pick up on just even like little tells, right? Did the center scratch his butt? Did Peyton lick his lips? Did he, Yeah. So, I mean, here's a good story. We were playing, when I was with the Jets, we were playing Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay was, they had a really talented tight end, controversial tight end, Kellen Winslow Jr. And he was known really as a receiver. He was more of a pass catcher than he was a blocking tight end. His dad was a Hall of Fame tight end as well, and so he comes from good pedigree. So the thing about this kid was, even going back into the University of Miami days, he was known for his hands. He had incredible hands.
Yep.
And he took great pride in that. He would show videos of him catching one-handed passes and all this stuff, right? But he was so into it and into himself, he didn't realize that every time a play was called in the huddle, if it was a run, he wouldn't touch his gloves. If it was a pass, every single time they broke the huddle, he would tighten his gloves, just pull them up a little bit. Every single time. So, those are types of things that if you really want to spend 10 hours, 20 hours staring at the screen trying to figure out, you can. I mean, a lot of teams don't have them. And they do a good job of it. Like, the Colts was really hard. Anyway, so I do think that there's validity to the simplicity, right? But I also think that once the simplicity is handled and you're done with it, if you've got time, what else can you do? I would never suggest a player to try to run through all of these in their head before a play. All they really need to know is, explicitly know, is formation, right? Maybe the backfield set, right? Everything else is, this all is after the fact. Play type, you don't know that until the ball's
Until it's snapped.
Yep, all that stuff. So really, it's really just these two, for most, especially high school teams, that will tell you almost everything.
And I guess for linebackers, it probably is a little bit more in depth because you've got to. I mean, obviously secondary, you got to cover the run too, but they're more so worried about covering than they are stopping the run.
Well, and secondary, they don't have any interior gaps typically, and that's where it gets complicated, is in the interior, right? Like, if they're just edge support players, that's not a big deal. But yeah, you're right. I mean, linebackers are going to have a job similar to, say, like a center, on offense, where he's got to know everything.
You got two jobs,
Yeah, and a third job, which is to make sure everyone else is right. So that's a big part of it. So yeah, like I said, these last four, these are not something that you can know before the play, but you can use these to find the tendencies here, right? So once we've gone through all of these different lists, what I actually do, I do this in huddle, right? So I don't know if you have video, what do you call it, sharing software or like reviewing software or whatever. Other than Huddle, I'm not sure how it works, but you can use the same principles here. In Huddle, you can make a report. It's really easy. As long as you're inputting the data into the columns as the plays are going, right? Not as they're going, but as long as you have the data for all the plays, then when you run a report, it's just like that. You basically pick a couple categories, push a button, and then it spits out a report. And then from that point, I just take, for the most part, what I do is take 70% or higher as a tendency, right? So if I know that on that in this and this in that scenario, in the context of that field position, that right, that they run the ball 78% of the time, that's good. I'm going to share that with my team. If it's less than that, I'm not telling them, because I don't think people realize how close 65 is to 35. It's not that far off. So I wait till it's 70%. And that way, you've got at least twice, 2 times better chance, slightly more than that. So anyway, and then oftentimes you might not be able to narrow them down by play. That's a hard thing to do sometimes. Play type is usually pretty easy. Third and short, third and long, we know it's run, we know it's pass. The play itself, we can still get indications, but it's almost more important for players, defensive players, to know the play type. Because that dictates to them what rules they should be following for the play. The play itself, that's probably not even something they're aware of most of the time until after the play. So that's that. And then the ball carrier, the reason I separate the routes and the
ball carrier.
Remember, Coach, we coached together with Coach Matt Daniels. And he was, even when he was the head coach, he was also the DB's coach still, sort of. But he would input a lot of the data for plays, especially the passing plays. So instead of what he would do is he would call the play whatever the route combination was, all 5 routes. So there was never a duplicate play. So I don't like that. So instead, offensive play to me is this a drop back pass? Is this a bootleg? Is this a power? Is it counter? Right?
Yeah.
So that's a little more specific. Then we talk about the routes, right? So I say offensive plays, pass plays, I say there's about 4 or 5 categories, right? You got quick game or 3-step, you got 5-step, you got play action, you got RPO, and you got screen. Those are the main ones.
Yep.
So, and you could really, this play action could also be like bootlegs and waggles, right?
Yeah.
But, and I would still separate them, but that's about as much as I would separate all the pass plays, right? And the run plays, there's just not as many, right? It's power, it's counter, whatever.
Yeah.
So once we have that, right? Because maybe that's all I need to know as a certain defender. I just need to know it's quick. Like if I'm a defensive lineman, I don't need to know the route. I just need to know that it's quick.
Yeah.
Right. So then we get more specific though for the back end who might need to know the routes. Right. That's when we put the 4-7-4 or the 4-7-7-4 and whatnot. The reason that this is important is because certain ball carriers and intended receivers show up on certain situations all the time.
Yeah.
For example, a big tight end with sure hands. Third and medium,
They're going to.
teams love that, right?
Yeah.
So that's why this is important because you want to know who their go-to guy is. When they're in a jam, when all the cards are on the table. That's not what I'm saying. When all the chips are on the table, chips. When all the chips are on the table, who are they going to?
Yeah.
Right?
Who's the guy?
The go-to guy, right?
Yep.
So that's the framework that I would use as a player or as a coach. I would say to focus mostly on
First 4.
on how these first 2 really on how these 2 really affect all this.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Actually, we should do a video on how to create reports, like effective reports in Huddle, so that when I found this out, I was like, oh my God, this is magic. This is stuff that coaches still do by hand. I called my old college coach. I asked him, you were asking me about, do defenses do this? Right?
Yeah.
And I don't know anybody that does this. And the reason is nobody ever talks about it. Nobody has ever taught another person that I've asked. I mean, and I've asked around. I've asked a lot of people. Nobody was ever taught how to study film ever.
Yeah.
Now they have studied film, whatever that means. They watched with coaches. The coaches asked them questions and whatnot. So I called my old coaches and I said, "Hey, who taught you how to watch film?" And they said, "What do you mean?" Well, did someone explicitly teach you the steps to watch film? No, I don't think so. I mean, just pick it up, you know. Say, yeah, that's great, but how do you coach your players? Well, you know what I like to do first sometimes? Whoa, why don't we have a system? Like, why is it sometimes you're going to do this and sometimes you're going to do that? Like, why don't we just have rules and system? So after talking to a bunch of these guys, I said, I think I'm going to make one. And it turned out that I had already made one. I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And that it happened to be in this sequence. So I find this really useful. But again, this is exhaustive. You don't need all of this, right? But to have it all sort of in the back of your mind, to understand the context as a whole, not maybe all the details, it's a big difference, right? Like situational awareness.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about guys like Ed Reed, right? Or Troy Polamalu. These are guys that had almost like an extra sense. It's not because they had an extra sense, it's because they studied like crazy. They had a good idea and feel for what someone was going to do.
Yeah.
Even if they didn't know it. Sometimes it's just instinct.
Yeah. For sure. It's good stuff, man.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Luke, you got anything?
No.
Do you hear Luke's voice? Go ahead, say it again.
No.
Luke was one of our players a few years ago and then has since gone on to the college ranks. He was at Ole Miss playing there, and he's going to transfer now and do something a little better for him. So we're happy to have him helping and near us and tall. He's really tall, 6'7". You can probably tell by his voice. Go do it again.
Oh, can they even hear me?
Can you go, Baby, lock the door and turn the lights down low.
I could. But
Do it.
Not on camera, I can't.
Well, you're not on camera.
Not on recording.
You're
On
talking
audio.
on recording.
That's a lonely drive type song.
Lock the door and turn them lights. Here, let me pull this in here. Baby, lock the door and turn the lights down low. All right, Rube.
All right, bro.
What do you want to say?
Got nothing, man.
All right.
It's good stuff.
Good show?
Yep.
We should have like a breakdown to get out of here. Oh, breakdown. Like wide out crew breakdown.
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
I think that was it. We just did it.
Yeah.
I think that's how we should do it. I dictate.